In the quiet moments between our busy lives, when the noise subsides and we're left alone with ourselves, many of us encounter an uncomfortable truth. Beneath our carefully constructed exteriors lies a landscape of emotional pain that we've become quite skilled at avoiding. Perhaps you felt it too, that subtle tightness in your chest when anxiety emerges, the heat rising to your face when anger ignites, or the heaviness that settles in your body when sadness takes hold. These feelings are not signs of weakness or failure, but rather messengers carrying important information about our inner world. The Buddha taught that suffering, dukkha, is an inevitable part of the human experience. This isn't meant to discourage us but rather to liberate us through honest acknowledgement. When we cease struggling against the reality of pain, we can begin the authentic work of transformation. Yet in our modern world, with its emphasis on happiness and positive thinking, we've developed sophisticated methods to evade the discomfort of our emotions, often making our suffering more persistent and profound in the process. Consider the story of Maya, a dedicated physician who prided herself on her emotional control. When her long-term relationship ended unexpectedly, she immersed herself in work, maintaining a composed exterior while internally, her unacknowledged grief festered. "I don't have time to fall apart," she told herself, unaware that her first mistake was already in motion, the refusal to acknowledge her pain. The Buddha taught that what we resist persists, and modern psychology confirms this wisdom. By denying her emotions, Maya was paradoxically strengthening their hold over her life. This avoidance of emotional pain represents our first common mistake. We believe that by suppressing difficult feelings, by staying busy, intellectualizing our experiences, or numbing ourselves through various distractions, we can somehow escape their influence. The Buddha described this as the futility of running from our own shadow. Just as a shadow cannot be outrun, our unaddressed emotions will follow us wherever we go, appearing in unexpected ways: physical ailments, disrupted sleep, irritability, or a pervasive sense of disconnection from life. The Pali Canon, the earliest recorded Buddhist teachings, speaks of the futility of avoidance through the metaphor of a poisoned arrow. If struck by such an arrow, would a wise person refuse treatment while demanding to know who shot the arrow, what materials it was made from, and other peripheral questions? Or would they simply remove the arrow and treat the wound? Yet with our emotional pain, we often behave like the unwise person, deflecting, analyzing, or compartmentalizing rather than directly addressing what hurts. In the silence of meditation, Maya eventually began to recognize the weight of her unacknowledged grief. At first, it terrified her, this ocean of feelings she had been holding at bay. "If I let myself feel this," she worried, "I might never stop crying." This fear of being overwhelmed by our emotions constitutes another aspect of our avoidance. Yet Buddhist wisdom suggests that emotions, like all phenomena, are impermanent, anicca. They arise, peak, and naturally dissipate when we create space for them rather than resisting their presence. Modern neuroscience confirms this ancient insight. When we name and acknowledge our emotions without judgment, a practice known as mindful awareness or sati in Buddhist tradition, we activate regulatory regions in our prefrontal cortex that help modulate the amygdala's alarm signals. Simply put, turning toward our pain with gentle awareness helps process emotions that persistence would otherwise persist through avoidance. The second mistake we commonly make is believing our emotions define us, confusing temporary states with our essential nature. In Buddhist philosophy, this is related to the concept of anatta or non-self, which teaches that our identity is not fixed but fluid, not singular but composed of countless changing elements. When we say, "I am angry," or "I am anxious," we create a false identification that limits our perspective and options for responding. The emotion becomes not just something we're experiencing but something we believe we are. David, a university professor, experienced debilitating anxiety that he had come to see as a fundamental character flaw. "I've always been an anxious person," he would say, as though anxiety were an immutable aspect of his being rather than a temporary visitor. This over-identification led to his third mistake, judging his emotional responses as evidence of personal inadequacy. With each experience of anxiety, David would add layers of self-criticism, transforming a difficult but manageable emotion into a complex tangle of suffering. The Buddha taught that this added dimension of judgment, what modern psychologists sometimes call the second arrow, often causes more suffering than the original emotional pain. The first arrow is the unavoidable pain of being human: disappointment, loss, fear, sadness. The second arrow is our reaction to that pain: "I shouldn't feel this way, this means I'm weak," or "I'll never get past this." While we cannot always prevent the first arrow, we have considerable influence over whether we shoot the second one. Through mindfulness practice, we develop the capacity to observe our emotions with kind attention rather than becoming entangled in them. We learn to say, "There is anger present," rather than, "I am angry," creating a spaciousness that allows for wiser responses. This subtle shift in language reflects a profound shift in relationship to our inner experience. As David began to practice this approach, he noticed something remarkable. When he stopped fighting his anxiety and instead acknowledged it with compassionate awareness, its grip began to loosen. The practice of non-identification doesn't mean detaching from our emotions or floating above them in spiritual bypass. Rather, it involves developing a more spacious relationship with our emotional landscape, recognizing that we are the vast sky that contains passing weather, not the weather itself. This perspective aligns with both Buddhist wisdom and contemporary mindfulness-based therapeutic approaches, which emphasize observing emotions as passing events in awareness rather than defining characteristics of the self. Our fourth common mistake emerges from our desire for immediate relief, seeking external solutions for internal suffering. Like Sarah, who cycled through relationships, career changes, and locations, always believing happiness awaited in the next external adjustment. "When I find the right partner, then I'll feel complete," she would tell herself, or, "Once I move to a more beautiful place, I'll finally be at peace." This approach reflects what Buddhism identifies as the cycle of craving, tanha, and attachment that perpetuates suffering. The Buddha taught that lasting peace comes not from arranging external circumstances to match our desires, but from transforming our relationship with those desires themselves. This doesn't mean abandoning meaningful goals or accepting harmful situations. Buddhist practice is not passive resignation. Rather, it involves recognizing that even when we achieve what we want externally, if our internal relationship with experience remains unchanged, our suffering will simply find new forms. Modern positive psychology research supports this ancient wisdom. Studies consistently show that beyond meeting basic needs, increases in wealth, status, or possessions produce only temporary spikes in happiness before we return to our baseline. This phenomenon, known as hedonic adaptation, parallels the Buddha's teachings on the ultimately unsatisfying nature of sense pleasures and achievements that aren't accompanied by inner development. The path beyond these common mistakes begins with a radical acceptance of our emotional reality. This doesn't mean passive resignation to suffering but rather an active, courageous presence with what is. When we stop fighting against our emotional landscape and instead bring curious, compassionate awareness to it, something remarkable happens. The emotions themselves begin to transform. Returning to Maya's story, her healing journey began in earnest when she finally allowed herself to feel the full depth of her grief. Sitting in meditation one evening, she stopped trying to control or analyze her pain and simply let it be present. Tears came, and contrary to her fears, they didn't overwhelm her. Instead, allowing this natural expression created a sense of release. For the first time, she later reflected, I felt like I was being honest with myself, not trying to be stronger or more spiritual than I actually was. This quality of honest presence is what Buddhist practice calls bare attention, seeing clearly what is happening without adding or subtracting anything. It forms the foundation for transformation. When we observe our pain without the additional layers of avoidance, identification, judgment, or external seeking, we create the conditions for natural healing to occur. The Buddha compared this process to caring for a wound, providing the right conditions through careful attention while trusting the body's innate healing capacity. The practice of mindfulness, sati, offers a direct path to developing this capacity. By deliberately bringing non-judgmental awareness to our present experience, including difficult emotions, we strengthen our ability to stay present rather than being carried away by habitual reactions. This doesn't mean our emotions immediately disappear. Rather, we develop a new relationship with them, one characterized by spaciousness and choice rather than constriction and compulsion. David found that a simple mindfulness practice transformed his relationship with anxiety. Each morning, he would sit quietly for 20 minutes, acknowledging whatever emotions were present with gentle naming, feeling anxiety, feeling worry, feeling fear. Over time, he noticed that these emotions, when met with kind attention rather than resistance, would naturally rise and fall like waves. More importantly, he began to experience himself as the witness of these changing states rather than being defined by them. Complementing mindfulness, the Buddhist practice of metta, loving kindness, offers powerful medicine for the judgmental attitudes we often bring to our emotional pain. This practice involves deliberately cultivating warm, friendly intentions toward ourselves and others through phrases such as, "May I be peaceful," or "May I meet this difficulty with compassion." Research in effective neuroscience now confirms that such practices actually alter brain activity patterns associated with negative self-judgment and fear. For Sarah, who had been seeking external solutions to internal discomfort, the practice of contentment, santushti, provided a revolutionary perspective. Rather than continuing her search for the perfect circumstances, she began to cultivate appreciation for what was already present in her life. This didn't mean abandoning meaningful goals, but rather pursuing them from a place of sufficiency rather than lack. "I realized I'd been treating my life as a perpetual problem to solve," she reflected, rather than an experience to fully inhabit. The integration of these Buddhist practices with modern psychological understanding creates a powerful toolkit for transforming our relationship with emotional pain. Instead of making the four common mistakes, avoidance, over-identification, judgment, and external seeking, we learn to meet our emotions with presence, perspective, compassion, and inner resourcefulness. This approach doesn't eliminate difficulties from our lives, but it fundamentally changes how we experience them. The Buddha taught that freedom comes not from perfect circumstances but from a transformed relationship with the circumstances we encounter. When emotional pain arises, as it inevitably will, we can remember to pause and create space around the experience. We can notice the habitual tendencies to avoid, identify, judge, or seek external solutions, and gently choose a different path. In that moment of conscious choice, we reclaim our capacity for wisdom and compassion. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. Like any meaningful growth, it unfolds gradually through consistent practice and patient self-observation. There will be days when old habits reassert themselves, when we find ourselves avoiding, identifying, judging, or seeking external fixes. The Buddhist path encourages us to meet even these moments with kind awareness, recognizing that our missteps are not failures but opportunities to begin again with fresh understanding. Maya, David, and Sarah each found their way to this more skillful relationship with emotional pain. For Maya, the key was breaking through avoidance and allowing herself to fully experience her grief. For David, it was recognizing that anxiety was a passing state rather than his identity. For Sarah, it was discovering that peace comes from how we relate to our circumstances, not just from the circumstances themselves. Their journeys remind us that healing is possible, not because pain can be eliminated from human experience, but because we can learn to meet it with wisdom and compassion. As you reflect on your own relationship with emotional pain, consider which of these common mistakes might be most familiar in your experience. Perhaps you notice a tendency to busy yourself when difficult feelings arise, or to become so identified with emotions that they seem like permanent aspects of who you are. Maybe you recognize the habit of harsh self-judgment when painful emotions emerge, or the pattern of seeking external changes to address internal discomfort. Whatever patterns you observe, remember that awareness itself is the beginning of transformation. By simply noticing these tendencies with kind attention, you've already begun to create the space that allows for new possibilities. This awareness, cultivated through practices like mindfulness and self-compassion, gradually illuminates the path beyond suffering, not by eliminating emotional pain, but by transforming our relationship with it. In the gentle wisdom of Buddhist psychology, emotional pain is neither an enemy to vanquish nor a flaw to fix, but rather a natural part of being human that can be met with presence and care. When we learn to hold our difficulties with the same tender attention we would offer a wounded child or a dear friend in distress, we discover an inner capacity for healing that has been within us all along. This capacity, this fundamental wholeness beneath our wounds, is what Buddhist tradition points to as our true nature, obscured at times by confusion but never actually lost. The journey of healing emotional pain through Buddhist wisdom doesn't end with personal transformation. As we develop greater skill in working with our own suffering, we naturally become more available to others in their pain. The compassion we learn to extend to ourselves gradually expands to include all beings. In this way, our individual healing becomes a gift to the larger world, a contribution to the greater healing that our troubled world so desperately needs. May you meet your emotions with kind awareness, recognizing the patterns that increase suffering and cultivating the presence that allows for true healing. May you remember, in moments of difficulty, that you are not alone in your pain, and that the path to freedom lies not in perfect circumstances but in how you meet the circumstances of your life. And may your journey with emotional pain become a source of wisdom and compassion that benefits not only yourself but all beings.